Okay, today class we are going to be talking about the analysis chapter. Now I got this chapter out of the How Writing Works textbook for the English A class. It will be in your handouts underneath your Canvas tab. English B class, it is your textbook that you're working out of. So for the analysis chapter, starts on page 149. We're going to discuss what is an analysis and why is it important? What do we need to know about an analysis? Because we're going to be writing a literature analysis for our next paper. So we've already talked a little bit about how writing is affected when we're talking about literature. And now we're going to talk about how we change those things for an analysis. So looking on page 149, the textbook definition of an analysis is it's a document that helps break down information, complex information, by breaking those things into its parts and examining each of those parts in detail and explaining how they all work together for the whole. If we look on to page 150, 151, then you'll see these little blurbs, and they're basically just balls of words. Some are bigger, some are smaller, and these are called a keyword analysis. You may have seen these before. Basically, what it does is it breaks down a speech or any type of text, and it tells us which words are the most important and which are the least important by giving us the words that was mentioned most often in the bigger words and the words that was mentioned less often in the smaller words. So you may want to look at that to kind of get an idea of what a keyword analysis is. But moving on, because we're not going to be doing a keyword analysis, I want to focus a lot on page 153, which is our literary analysis, because that's what we're going to be writing. So what does it say a literary analysis is? It tells us, if you look at the very last sentence, that the genre of literary analysis is in some way similar to a keyword analysis, but it involves analyzing a text using a range of concepts drawn from the study of literature. That's important because we have to know all those different concepts that we talked about when writing about literature, like symbols, irony, similes, metaphors, etc., to be able to break down the text and talk about it. Okay? So that's why I stressed in the last video that you need to use those concepts that we talked about to break your text down into its components so that you will be able to explain how each of those work together to get the idea that the author is trying to get across to the reader. If you look on the following pages, 154 through, let's see, about 162, you'll have a few examples of a literary analysis. It might do you some good to look through and read some of those examples just to see what it's like to actually, write a literary analysis, but that's not required as part of your quiz. If you look on page 165, they are discussing a scene analysis. Now, even though in our book it's talking strictly about scene analysis for film, we can also use this in breaking down scenes from our literature because, as we all know, when we're reading literature, sometimes it's broken down into scenes. So if you look on page 165, you'll see scene analysis. And the definition here is whenever you use the concepts of film to break down a specific scene of a film. Okay, so for instance, if I'm watching Beauty and the Beast, and I break down the scene of where the Beast and Gaston fight it out, okay? That would be a scene analysis. And when we're doing a scene analysis, we always want to apply it to the overall idea. So if we're doing a scene analysis for a film, then we would want to apply that overall to the overall idea of the film. For instance, if we are doing that same scene that I just discussed about Gaston and Belle, then we would apply that to what does that mean to Beauty and the Beast as a whole in the film. So in other words, if we're doing this for our literature, we may discuss one specific scene that happens in the literature and then talk about how that scene affects the rest of the text. Okay, moving on. There are some examples following the scene analysis for those of you who may want to read through those to kind of get an idea of what a scene analysis is. But I would like to move on to page 174. And this is where they discuss a rhetorical analysis. Okay, so let me get it open up here. We have on page 174 the rhetorical analysis. Rhetorical analysis is a little different because what it does is it talks about literature, film, or any type of work and its effect on the readers. So how does that affect the readers? So sometimes we may do a small rhetorical analysis in our literature analysis, just like we may do a scene analysis in our literature analysis. And when we're doing that, we want to think about how does that text affect the readers when they're reading it. So that's going to be important in understanding the overall, again, idea of what's going on in that text. Okay, so if we move on, again, there are some more examples, and you may want to look at those to understand exactly what a rhetorical analysis is. But that is all of the different types of analysis that it talks about in this book or your handout, depending on which class you're in. But I want to look at page 184, okay? 184 talks about the strategies for an analysis. So it begins on page 184, but it actually goes through for a couple of pages. And what I want to talk about is it breaks it down into the steps that we want to follow when we are writing an analysis. And the first one is the pre-writing or the content, right? So the main thing that we want to do is when we start pre-writing for an analysis, we want to begin with our research. So before you even start putting your ideas out there, you kind of need to know what's being said about that text or that movie or whatever work it is that you're doing an analysis on. But for us, it's going to be a text because we're doing a literature analysis. So you kind of need to do some preliminary research to figure out what other people have said about the same text before you jump in with your own ideas. So always start your pre-writing with research. And then if we look over on page 186 and 187, it talks about developing a claim and why that's important to the overall analysis. So when we're developing a claim, that's basically like our thesis, what it is that we're trying to prove throughout the paper. And if you look on page 187, in that very top paragraph, there's an italicized word. And that's the word that we always want to think about when we are developing a claim or creating our thesis. The word is why. We always ask why when creating a thesis. For instance, in our literature analysis, we're going to focus on which specific theme that we think is important that the author's trying to talk about and why it's important, okay? So you always want to ask why. And for our specific literature analysis, we're going to talk about a specific theme that the author is discussing and why that theme is important to understanding the overall text. If you look at the bottom of 187, you're going to see drafting and organizing. And they're going to tell us that there are 3 different things that we should do when we're trying to draft and organize our first rough draft. So 1, begin with our evidence. 2, provide information that our audience is going to need to know before they can get to the analysis. So, are there terms? Are there ideas that they need to know about before they actually get to the analysis? Sometimes it's the background of the author. Sometimes it's something about the text itself, or sometimes it's specific ideas being discussed in the text that they need to know about before they get to your analysis. And thirdly, you want to frame your analysis in terms of popular or critical reception. Okay, what that means is all that research you've done, you've kind of gotten an idea of what the conversation is about that text. You are now joining that conversation. What that means is you're not going to walk into any other conversation and just start talking about whatever you want to talk about. When you walk up to a conversation, you stop and you listen to what the other people are saying. Then you join in with your own thoughts about what they're saying, correct? So just like in a normal conversation, when you're writing an academic paper on a literature analysis, you want to figure out what other people are saying about that piece of literature. You're joining that conversation. And so you do the research and you figure out what they're saying, and then you join in that conversation with your own ideas and thoughts. So make sure that you are framing your analysis in terms of popular or critical reception, which is basically just joining the conversation about that text. And finally, on page 188, they start discussing revising style, okay? And what this means is, remember, revising or style is going to be big picture ideas, right? Is our thesis correct? Is our paragraphs in the right order? Is our topic sentences clear? So here's 3 things that they say that we should do whenever we are revising for our style. And that first one is use appropriate terminology. In other words, if you are mentioning similes, say the word simile. If you're mentioning irony or symbols, say the words irony and symbol. And even if you're doing an analysis for another class, use the terms that are appropriate for that field. So you want to make sure that whatever terminology is common in that field, that's the terminology that you're using, okay? Secondly, introduce and interpret quotations. So obviously, using all this outside research and a text, we're going to insert some of those quotations into our paper to help prove our ideas. And when we do that, we need to introduce the quote and then interpret the quote. Do not just stick those quotes in there like confetti and just throw them wherever. You want to make sure that you introduce it, tell us why you think this is an important piece of information to be added, and then explain, interpret why that quote is important. Thirdly, we want to use descriptive language. So this is really important when you're talking about literature. You want to be descriptive. You want to talk about all the different things that have made you come to the conclusion that you've come to, and describe those things to the reader so that they can go on that same path with you. If you're vague, it's going to be hard for the reader to really grasp what it is that you're saying and to agree with you. So those are the 3 things that we want to do under revising and style. When we get over to the editing process, remember that's going to be small picture. So in other words, we want to fine tune our paper. We want to make sure that all of our grammar is correct, punctuation's correct, formatting's correct. And so you want to make sure that your formatting especially is on point. Because at this point, your formatting grade's going to go down, and you want to make sure that you get all those points, because I'm expecting it to be perfect. This is your 3rd paper, and we've already done 7 journals, so I expect those papers to be formatted perfectly. And that's not just including, Times New Roman 12-point font, double space, 1-inch margins, heading that's correct, header that's correct. This is also talking about quotations and citations and works cited pages. So all that needs to be exactly like it's supposed to be. So you're going to want to take extra time to go through and comb through it with a fine-tooth comb. Make sure that everything is just like it needs to be. Make sure that you account time for that. Don't try to rush the process. Remember, writing is a process. You need to follow the steps if you want to get the grade you want. I know that some of you may have recently just seen your essay grades, and if they are not where you want them to be, make sure that you're looking in the comments. Where are you missing those points? What do you need to do to make sure that you get those points in the next essay? So if you have questions, email me as always, and make sure that you are watching the videos, that you're doing your work online. Your journal that you have due for this week is the last journal that you'll have due for a little bit, because our last 3 journals are going to be focused on our last paper and helping us write that paper. Also, if you are having trouble with internet access or not being able to get online for some reason, you need to let me know, and we will try to figure out a solution for you, because it's critical that you are able to get internet access since we are not going to be on campus for a little while. Now, next week, you will be out for spring break, so we will not be meeting online, watching videos, or having any work to turn in next week. However, you do have homework for next week, and your homework for next week, basically for the Monday and Tuesday after we get back from spring break, is going to be a reading assignment, and it's going to be the text that we'll be studying. You will be able to find this information underneath the Canvas announcements and through the emails that I have been sending out to your school email addresses. So just make sure that we're staying in communication. That's going to be really important. If you're not doing what you have to do to get attendance grades, that's going to pile up really quickly, and you can still get dropped. Because I don't want you to get so far behind that you end up getting an F. That would be the worst possible thing. I'd rather give you a W than give you an F. So again, make sure you're staying in communication with me. If you're having problems, we need to talk about it so that I can alleviate those problems for you. But if you're not talking to me, I have no idea that there are any problems. I think that's all for right now. Hopefully all of you are well. Hopefully you're quarantining yourself, staying indoors as much as possible, away from anybody who may be immunocompromised or elderly. But honestly, they're saying that even young adults are being hospitalized. So just be careful. Stay vigilant in terms of washing your hands, not touching your face, trying to stay out of crowded places. And I know it sucks. It's the worst possible time. It's right at spring break. A lot of people have had to cancel plans. But do not fall into the trap of thinking this is not going to affect you, because it spreads faster than you know. You don't even show symptoms sometimes, and then you give it to someone who may be immunocompromised or elderly, and they could get very seriously ill. So let's all do our part and stay productive when we're supposed to be productive, and enjoy our time with our families. We'll try to relax. If you need anything from me, again, contact me through email. Do watch the entire video to get the credit for your attendance. So you have to watch the entire video. I know, but it is what it is. So I will see you guys after spring break, and I will be in communication through email and Canvas announcements.